Syria, once a beacon of history and culture, is now synonymous with conflict and suffering. The country's descent into chaos began in 2011, swept up in the wave of the Arab Spring. Peaceful protests demanding political reforms were met with a brutal crackdown by the government of Bashar al-Assad. This ignited an armed rebellion, plunging Syria into a civil war that has become one of the most devastating conflicts of the 21st century. Over the past decade, Syria has become a tangled web of warring factions, each vying for control. Rebel groups, initially united in their opposition to Assad, have fractured into a multitude of militias with differing ideologies and allegiances. International powers driven by strategic interests have fueled the conflict, turning Syria into a proxy battleground. The conflict has taken a particularly heavy toll on the northern part of the country. Idlib province, a stronghold of the opposition, has witnessed a surge in violence in recent months. The city of Aleppo, once Syria's economic heart, has been reduced to rubble, a stark reminder of the war's brutality. As the conflict enters its 11th year, there is no end in sight. The Syrian people continue to endure unimaginable suffering, caught in a cycle of violence with no escape. The international community, divided and seemingly paralyzed, struggles to find a solution to a crisis that has far-reaching consequences for the entire region. Amidst the chaos and fragmentation of the Syrian conflict, a new power has emerged, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS. This Islamist militant group, formerly affiliated with al-Qaeda, has rapidly expanded its control in northern Syria, capitalizing on the power vacuum created by the protracted war. HTS's rise has been both swift and strategic. The group has positioned itself as a defender of Sunni Muslims against the Assad regime, which is dominated by Alawites, an offshoot of Shia Islam. HTS has also sought to portray itself as a more moderate alternative to other jihadist groups operating in Syria, such as the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or ISIS. However, HTS's ideology and long-term goals remain shrouded in ambiguity. While the group has publicly renounced its affiliation with al-Qaeda, it continues to espouse a hardline Islamist ideology. HTS has implemented strict Islamic law in the areas under its control, drawing criticism from human rights groups. The group's rapid expansion has sent shockwaves through the region. HTS's control over key border crossings and infrastructure gives it significant leverage in any future political settlement. The group's growing influence has also raised concerns among international powers, who fear that HTS may harbor aspirations beyond Syria's borders. The Syrian conflict has unleashed one of the worst humanitarian crises in recent history. Millions of Syrians have been forced to flee their homes, seeking refuge within the country's borders, or risking perilous journeys to neighboring countries and beyond. The recent upsurge in violence in northern Syria has exacerbated the displacement crisis. Tens of thousands of civilians have been uprooted from their homes, fleeing for their lives as fighting rages around them. Many have sought shelter in overcrowded and undersupplied camps, where they face dire conditions. The displacement crisis has had a devastating impact on Syrian society. Families have been torn apart, with children bearing the brunt of the trauma. The loss of homes, livelihoods, and access to education has left deep scars on an entire generation. The international community has struggled to respond to the scale of the displacement crisis. Funding for humanitarian aid has fallen short of the needs on the ground. Host countries, already grappling with their own economic challenges, have struggled to cope with the influx of refugees. The city of Aleppo, once Syria's vibrant commercial hub, has become a chilling symbol of the war's brutality. For years, Aleppo has been at the epicenter of the conflict, subjected to relentless bombardment and ground fighting. The battle for Aleppo, which raged for months, reduced entire neighborhoods to rubble. Hospitals, schools, and markets were not spared from the onslaught. Civilians, trapped in the crossfire, faced unimaginable horrors. The fall of eastern Aleppo to government forces in December 2016 marked a turning point in the war. The siege of eastern Aleppo, which lasted for months, was characterized by indiscriminate attacks on civilian infrastructure and the use of chemical weapons. The scars of war run deep in Aleppo. The city's once bustling streets are now eerily deserted, lined with bombed-out buildings and debris. The few remaining residents face a daily struggle for survival, lacking access to basic necessities. Section 5. The Crumbling Regime, Syria's Uncertain Future. The Syrian conflict has entered a new and unpredictable phase with the recent fall of Damascus and the reported departure of President Bashar al-Assad. The once seemingly unshakable regime is now teetering on the brink, its grip on power significantly weakened. The capture of Damascus by rebel forces, a symbolic and strategic blow to the government, has created a power vacuum at the heart of the Syrian state. The whereabouts of Assad remain unclear, fueling speculation about his fate and the future leadership of the country. The collapse of the central government has raised profound questions about the future governance of Syria. The country is now effectively divided, with various factions controlling different parts of the territory. The potential for further fragmentation and chaos is high. The international community is grappling with the implications of the regime's collapse. The power vacuum could create opportunities for extremist groups such as HTS to consolidate their control. The lack of a clear interlocutor within Syria also complicates efforts to reach a negotiated settlement. Section 6. Echoes of War, the Human Cost of Conflict. The Syrian conflict has exacted a staggering human toll. Hundreds of thousands of people have been killed, and millions more have been injured or displaced. The war has left an entire generation scarred by violence, loss, and displacement. The physical and psychological wounds of war run deep. Many Syrians suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, and depression. The breakdown of social structures and support systems has exacerbated the mental health crisis. Children, the most vulnerable victims of conflict, have been disproportionately affected by the war. Many have witnessed violence firsthand, lost loved ones, or been separated from their families. The conflict has robbed an entire generation of their childhood, education, and future prospects. The Syrian conflict is a stark reminder of the devastating human cost of war. The international community has a moral imperative to alleviate the suffering of the Syrian people and to work towards a just and lasting peace. Section 7. A lifeline disrupted aid under threat. The humanitarian crisis in Syria has reached catastrophic proportions. Millions of people are in desperate need of food, water, shelter, and medical care. The conflict has devastated the country's infrastructure, making it extremely difficult to deliver aid to those in need. Humanitarian organizations face immense challenges in operating within Syria. The security situation is extremely volatile, and aid workers are often targeted by warring factions. The Syrian government has also been accused of obstructing aid deliveries to opposition-held areas. The disruption of aid deliveries has had a devastating impact on the civilian population. Malnutrition rates have soared, particularly among children. Outbreaks of preventable diseases such as cholera and measles have become more frequent. The international community must step up its efforts to ensure the safe and unimpeded delivery of humanitarian aid to all those in need in Syria. This includes holding all parties to the conflict accountable for violations of international humanitarian law and increasing funding for humanitarian assistance. Section 8. The World Watches, International Response and Inertia. The international community's response to the Syrian conflict has been widely criticized as inadequate and ineffective. Despite numerous resolutions and statements of concern, the international community has failed to take decisive action to end the violence or alleviate the humanitarian suffering. The United Nations Security Council, the body tasked with maintaining international peace and security, has been paralyzed by divisions among its permanent members. Russia and China, allies of the Syrian government, have repeatedly vetoed resolutions that would have imposed sanctions on the Assad regime or authorized the use of force. The lack of international consensus and political will has created a climate of impunity in Syria. Warring factions have committed atrocities with little fear of consequences. The Syrian people have been left to bear the brunt of the world's inaction. The Syrian conflict is a test of the international community's commitment to upholding its responsibility to protect civilians from mass atrocities. The world's failure to act decisively in Syria has set a dangerous precedent, emboldening perpetrators of violence and undermining the rules-based international order. Section 9. Syria, at a crossroads, navigating the path ahead. As Syria enters its 11th year of conflict, the country stands at a crossroads. The fall of the Assad regime raises profound questions about Syria's future. The power vacuum risks further fragmentation and chaos. Competing armed groups could plunge Syria into new violence. A concerted effort is needed to prevent further bloodshed and support a political transition. Amidst the ruins, there is still hope for a better future.